Welcome back to another inspiring story that shows how a simple moment can reveal the true character of a person. Comment where you're watching from, as we share a remarkable encounter that took place on a crisp autumn morning in New York City. The day began like any other on the busy streets of Manhattan. Thomas Mitchell, a longtime resident of the city who had fallen on hard times, sat quietly on the corner of Fifth Avenue. At 62 years old, Thomas had once been a successful accountant, but a series of personal tragedies and health issues had left him homeless for the past 8 months. Despite his circumstances, he maintained a quiet dignity, his clothes worn but clean, his gray beard neatly trimmed thanks to the local shelter services. The morning crowds moved past him in their usual hurry, bankers, tourists, and busy New Yorkers all caught up in their own worlds. Sarah Anderson, a regular passerby who worked at a nearby coffee shop, had dropped off her usual morning coffee for Thomas, one of the small kindnesses that helped him maintain hope. The steam rose from the cup, warming his hands as he watched the city wake up around him. Jennifer Martinez, a local business owner, had recently noticed Thomas's presence and his gentle demeanor. Unlike some others in his situation, he never pressured anyone for money, instead sitting quietly with a small sign that read, "Any help appreciated. God bless." She had seen how he would sometimes share what little he had with others in similar situations, particularly with Michael Davidson, another homeless veteran who frequented the area. The morning took an unexpected turn when a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb nearby. Secret Service agents, including Robert Manning and James Foster, emerged first, their alert eyes scanning the surroundings. Then, from the vehicle stepped Barron Trump, the tall, teenage son of the former president, accompanied by his tutor, Lisa Pearson, on their way to a nearby educational event. Thomas hadn't planned to speak to anyone that morning, but something about the young man's presence stirred something in him. Perhaps it was the memory of his own son, now grown and distant, or maybe it was the unusual sight of someone so privileged walking past his corner. Whatever the reason, Thomas found himself speaking softly as Barron passed nearby. "Excuse me, young man," Thomas said, his voice gentle and respectful. "Could you spare $1?" The Secret Service agents, including Daniel Cooper and William Parker, tensed slightly but maintained their professional composure. Nearby pedestrians, including Michelle Henderson and Christopher Davis, slowed their pace, curious about how this unexpected interaction would unfold. What happened next would soon become a story shared across social media and news outlets, not because of its grandeur, but because of its simple humanity. Barron Trump stopped, something that surprised even his security detail. His tutor, Lisa Pearson, watched with interest as her student turned toward Thomas. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fifth Avenue as time seemed to pause for a moment. Rachel Brown, a tourist from Ohio who happened to be recording the city scenes on her phone, captured what followed. Several onlookers, including Kevin Davis and Patricia Gordon, would later share their accounts of the interaction. Local shop owner Angela Turner had just opened her boutique's doors when she noticed the gathering crowd. She had seen Thomas every day for months and had always been struck by his quiet dignity. Now she watched as this unexpected moment unfolded between two people from vastly different worlds. The response that followed would demonstrate that sometimes the most powerful moments come not from grand gestures, but from simple acts of human connection. As Barron stopped and turned toward Thomas, the usual bustle of Fifth Avenue seemed to fade into the background. Even the ever-present city noise seemed to dim, as if New York itself was holding its breath. Security Officer Stephen Wilson maintained his watchful stance, but even he would later remark on the unusual nature of this moment. Nearby, college student Emily Watson paused her morning rush to class, sensing that she was witnessing something special. Regular commuter David Thompson, who had passed Thomas's corner every day for months without a second glance, found himself stopping to watch. He had grown unconsciously accustomed to ignoring the city's homeless population, but something about this interaction commanded attention. Restaurant owner Maria Ochoa, who had just stepped out to accept a morning delivery, joined the growing number of witnesses. She had often provided Thomas with leftover food at the end of her shifts, and now she watched with particular interest as this scene unfolded. The morning light caught the windows of the surrounding buildings, creating a subtle glow that seemed to highlight this moment of connection between two individuals from vastly different circumstances. Professional photographer Jonathan Brady, who happened to be nearby for an unrelated assignment, would later describe the scene as having an almost cinematic quality. Local police officer Richard Wise, making his regular morning rounds, observed from a respectful distance. He had known Thomas for months and had always appreciated how the man never caused any disturbances, maintaining his dignity despite his circumstances. The growing crowd included Amanda Kelly, a social worker who had actually tried to help Thomas find housing months earlier. She watched with particular interest, knowing his background and the series of unfortunate events that had led him to this corner. As Barron Trump stood there, his tall frame casting a shadow across the sidewalk, the city seemed to wait for his response. The moment stretched out, filled with possibility. Would this be just another instance of worlds passing by each other without truly connecting? Or would it become something more meaningful? The weight of the moment was not lost on the observers. Teacher Susan West, walking her class to a nearby museum, used the opportunity to quietly point out to her students how a simple interaction could represent something much larger about human connection and dignity. In the windows of the nearby office building, workers like Michael Wilcox and Jennifer Torres paused their morning routines, drawn to the unusual scene unfolding on the street below. Even in New York, a city known for its extraordinary moments, this particular interaction seemed to capture something special. Nurse Kayla Gardner, just finishing her night shift at the nearby hospital, stopped on her way home. She had treated Thomas once in the emergency room and knew parts of his story that others didn't, about his struggles with medical bills, his fight to maintain his health without insurance, and his unwavering politeness despite his circumstances. The tension in the air was palpable as everyone waited to see how this brief encounter between two very different lives would play out. Would it be just another passing moment in the city's endless stream of interactions, or would it become something more meaningful? Something that might remind everyone watching of their shared humanity? Local shop employee Brandon Palmer had just started setting up the morning display when he noticed the gathering crowd. He had often shared brief conversations with Thomas during his smoke breaks, learning bits and pieces about the man's past life as an accountant, his love for his estranged family, and his daily struggles to maintain hope. The morning traffic continued to flow past on Fifth Avenue, but the immediate area around this interaction had taken on an almost theatrical quality. The usual New York hurry had paused, as if the city itself was curious about what would happen next. Street performer Luis Marsh, who usually set up his guitar case a block away, had just arrived for his morning routine when he noticed the scene. He knew Thomas from their occasional conversations about music. Thomas had once played guitar himself, in happier days. The growing crowd included people from all walks of life, businessmen like Alexander Harrington, students like Madison Spears, tourists like Robin Martin, and local workers like Diane Fisher. Each of them seemed to sense that they were witnessing something unique, a moment when the usual barriers between social classes and circumstances might briefly dissolve. As the moment hung in the air, the city's usual soundtrack, the honking horns, the rumbling subway beneath the streets, the distant sirens, seemed to fade into the background. All attention was focused on this unexpected interaction between a homeless man and the son of a former president. The weight of the moment was evident in the composed but alert stance of the Secret Service agents, in the curious gazes of the onlookers, and in the dignified way Thomas sat, waiting for a response. Whatever would happen next would likely be shared across social media within hours, discussed in coffee shops and offices, and perhaps even make its way to the evening news. Local reporter Charles Spears had just emerged from the subway station, immediately recognizing the significance of what he was witnessing. He would later write about not just the interaction itself, but about how it seemed to represent something larger about human connection and compassion in an often divided city. The morning sun continued to climb higher over the Manhattan skyline, its rays catching the windows of the surrounding buildings and creating a natural spotlight for this unprecedented moment. The usual rush of the city had temporarily paused, as if New York itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. As the moment stretched out, it seemed to take on additional weight and meaning. This wasn't just about $1, or even about the interaction between two individuals. It had become something more, a moment that might reveal something about character, about humanity, and about the possibility of connection across the vast divides that often separate people in modern society. What happened next would be recorded, shared, and discussed across the city and beyond, not because of its grandeur or drama, but because of its simple, profound humanity. The response that followed would demonstrate that sometimes the most meaningful moments come not from grand gestures or planned events, but from simple, spontaneous acts of human connection. Barron Trump's response would prove to be far more than just a simple answer to a request for $1. As he turned to face Thomas Mitchell, the young man's expression showed none of the dismissal or discomfort that so often characterizes such encounters on New York's busy streets. Instead, Barron took a step closer, surprising his Secret Service detail. Agent Stephen Lewis maintained his professional composure but exchanged quick glances with his colleague, Bradley Bender. The crowd, which now included curious onlookers like Francisco Wilcox and Brandy Williams, grew quieter, straining to hear what would happen next. "Sir," Barron said, his voice carrying a maturity beyond his years, "would you mind if I sat with you for a moment?" The request caught everyone off guard, including his tutor, Lisa Pearson, who had never seen her student make such an unexpected social gesture. Diane Hale, a social worker who happened to be passing by, stopped in her tracks. In her 15 years of working with the homeless population, she had rarely witnessed someone of Barron's social status choosing to engage so directly. Caroline York, a local business owner, pulled out her phone, sensing that this moment needed to be documented. Thomas Mitchell straightened slightly, surprised by the young man's request. "Of course," he replied, his voice carrying the gentle dignity that Joshua O'Neill, a regular passerby, had often noticed during his morning commute. Ryan Allen, a nearby hot dog vendor, watched with interest as Barron carefully sat down on the concrete beside Thomas. The Secret Service agents, including Ryan Jennings and Timothy Cunningham, adjusted their positions accordingly, maintaining their protective stance while allowing this unusual interaction to unfold. Colin Davis, a journalist from a local paper, had just emerged from the subway and immediately recognized the significance of what he was witnessing. Stacy Rogers, a kindergarten teacher leading her class on a field trip, used the moment as an impromptu lesson for her students about compassion and human dignity. Nicole Smith, one of the parents chaperoning the trip, found herself moved by the simple yet powerful scene unfolding before them. "I'm Barron," the young man said, introducing himself without any pretense or mention of his famous family. Jesse Thomas, a construction worker on his lunch break, observed how the teenagers seemed completely unaffected by the growing crowd of onlookers, which now included Madison Spears and Sylvia Welch from the nearby office building. Thomas shared his name in return, and what followed was not a brief exchange of pleasantries, but a genuine conversation. Melanie Ewing, who worked at the corner cafe, paused her morning routine to watch as the unlikely pair began to talk. Gail Jackson, a regular customer at the cafe, stood beside her, both women touched by the unexpected scene. The conversation that unfolded wasn't just about Thomas's current circumstances. Barron asked about his life, his past, and his dreams for the future. Vincent Dean, a retired teacher who frequently walked this route, later remarked how the young man listened with genuine interest and respect. Eduardo Cooper, operating a nearby newsstand, observed how Thomas's demeanor changed during the conversation. The man's usual resigned expression gave way to something more animated as he shared his story about being a former accountant, about the series of events that led to his current situation, and about his hopes of reconnecting with his family. As they talked, Kendra Suarez, a nurse heading home from her night shift, noticed how other homeless individuals in the area, including Christopher Navarro and Jonathan Kim, watched the interaction with a mix of surprise and hope. Timothy Stone, a regular donor to local homeless shelters, stopped to witness what he would later describe as a masterclass in human dignity. The conversation continued, touching on Thomas's previous career in finance, his love for classical music, which surprised John Collins, and his volunteer work at the local shelter when he was still employed. Catherine Barnes, who ran that very shelter, happened to be passing by and confirmed Thomas's account with a quiet nod. Derek McDonald, a Wall Street executive running late for a meeting, found himself pausing to watch, his usual rush forgotten in the face of this unusual scene. Cynthia Thomas, his assistant who had been trying to catch up with him, stood quietly beside him, equally captivated by the interaction. What happened next would be recounted countless times by witnesses like Daryl Mercado and Tom Hill. Barron reached into his pocket, but what he pulled out wasn't just $1 or even a handful of bills. Brian Taylor, standing close enough to see clearly, would later describe how the young man removed a business card along with some cash. Jill Davidson, a career counselor, watched with particular interest as Barron explained that the card belonged to someone who might be able to help Thomas regain his footing in the financial sector. Travis Wright, who worked at the mentioned firm, recognized the name on the card and knew the opportunity was genuine. Joseph White, a security guard at a nearby building, overheard Barron explaining that he had been carrying the card specifically to give to someone who could make good use of it. Sean Heath, a business consultant, later remarked how this detail revealed the premeditated nature of the young man's kindness. Janice Carpenter, who had been filming the interaction from her office window, captured how Barron then did something even more unexpected. Instead of simply handing over the card and money, he asked Thomas about his immediate needs. Jill Horn and Christy Robertson, social workers from different organizations, exchanged knowing looks, recognizing the wisdom in this approach. Kenneth Martinez, who ran a nearby shelter, watched as Thomas honestly shared his challenges. Taylor Moore, a volunteer at the same shelter, would later confirm the accuracy of Thomas's account of his efforts to rebuild his life. Wendy Manning, another witness, noted how Barron listened intently to every word. The crowd, which now included Karen Warren and Julie Dixon, watched as Barron then made a phone call. Anthony Young, a local business owner, overheard enough to realize the young man was arranging immediate temporary housing for Thomas. Joyce Love, who worked at the mentioned hotel, confirmed later that the arrangements were legitimate and comprehensive. Nicole Terrell, a psychologist who worked with homeless individuals, observed how this interaction maintained Thomas's dignity throughout. Jake Knight, a former homeless person himself who had successfully rebuilt his life, recognized the value of offering help while preserving someone's self-respect. Kimberly Delgado, a nearby restaurant owner, stepped forward to offer Thomas a job in her kitchen once he got settled. William Young, her business partner, immediately supported the idea, demonstrating how one act of kindness could inspire others to help as well. Brian Moreno, a local police officer, watched the scene unfold with approval, noting how this kind of personal intervention often proved more effective than institutional approaches. Norman Jones, a community organizer, was already thinking about how to replicate this model of personal connection and practical help. Tony Green, who ran a local clothing bank, made a mental note to put together a suitable interview outfit for Thomas. Kylie Hicks, a regular donor to her organization, immediately offered to help with this effort. Adam Mercado, who owned a nearby barber shop, stepped forward to offer his services for when Thomas was ready for job interviews. As the interaction drew to a close, Deborah Hill and Emily Kerr, both career counselors, exchanged contact information with Thomas, offering to help with his resume and interview preparation. Ray Foster, a hiring manager at a local firm, also approached to offer his card and support. The impact of this moment continued to ripple outward. Felicia Clark, who worked at a nearby foundation, was already making calls to arrange additional support services. Mrs. Melissa Johnson, a social worker, began coordinating with Rebecca Sanford to ensure Thomas would have ongoing assistance during his transition. Andrea White watched as Barron stood up, brushing off his clothes with natural modesty. Rebecca Pugh, a journalist, noted how the young man made no attempt to draw attention to his actions or seek recognition for his kindness. Christian Spence, a local minister, would later describe the scene as a perfect example of authentic compassion in action. Samantha Benson, who worked in public relations, observed how neither Barron nor his security team made any attempt to prevent the growing number of witnesses from recording the interaction. Felicia Brown and Brittany Bartlett, social media influencers, were already sharing the story, but focused on the genuine nature of the help being offered rather than the celebrity aspect. The morning had transformed from a simple request for $1 into something far more meaningful. Heather Brooks, a sociology professor from a nearby university, would later use this incident in her lectures about social change and individual impact. Stephanie King, one of her students who witnessed the scene, captured its essence in a photograph that would later go viral. Shannon Morris and George Jackson, both community activists, immediately began discussing how to build on this moment to create more opportunities for meaningful connections across social barriers. William Cooper and Tamara Lee recognized that they had witnessed not just an act of charity, but a moment of genuine human connection that could inspire others to do more than simply pass by those in need. As Barron prepared to leave, Jordan Chung noticed how he shook Thomas's hand with genuine respect. Laura Ruiz, a body language expert who later reviewed the footage, would point out how this final gesture perfectly encapsulated the dignity that characterized the entire interaction. This moment on a New York street corner would soon become more than just a viral video or heartwarming news story. Maria Hale, a sociologist, would later write about how it demonstrated the power of treating every human interaction as an opportunity for meaningful connection. Bonnie Lloyd, watching from her coffee shop window, observed how the crowd's initial curiosity had transformed into genuine engagement with the issue of homelessness. The morning's events proved that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with a simple question and the willingness to truly see the person asking it. As Barron Trump departed with his security detail, he left behind not just hope for one man, but an example of how genuine connection and practical help could transform lives in ways that spare change never could. Within hours of the encounter, its impact began spreading far beyond that Manhattan street corner. Stacy Beard, a social media manager who had witnessed the scene, was one of the first to share the story online. Her thoughtful post, focusing on the dignity of the interaction rather than its celebrity aspect, quickly gained traction. Jennifer Ramirez, a local news producer, recognized that this story was different from the usual viral moments. Mrs. Alexis Morales, her senior editor, agreed to dedicate a full segment to exploring not just what happened, but why it mattered. And Cherry, their veteran reporter, began gathering perspectives from those who had witnessed the interaction firsthand. Carol Garcia, who ran a homeless outreach program, noticed an immediate surge in volunteer applications. Wendy Turner, one of her regular volunteers, reported that people were specifically mentioning Barron's example as their inspiration for getting involved. Matthew Peters found himself fielding calls from potential donors who wanted to support similar initiatives. Sharon Benjamin, who worked at a nearby business center, observed how the conversation among her colleagues had shifted. Megan Henderson and Dennis Peck, usually focused solely on market reports and deadlines, were now discussing ways their company could engage with community support programs. The impact continued to spread as Deanna Fitzpatrick, a corporate social responsibility director, began receiving inquiries from other companies about implementing homeless outreach programs. Lynn Knight, who managed a chain of local restaurants, started developing a hiring program specifically for individuals trying to rebuild their lives. Sierra Alexander, witnessing how the story was unfolding, used her platform as a community organizer to highlight other success stories of people who had overcome homelessness. Matthew Aguirre, one of these success stories, came forward to share his own journey, inspired by Thomas's story. Michael Graves, a filmmaker, saw the potential for a documentary not about this specific incident, but about the larger issue of human connection across social barriers. Douglas Barron, his producer, immediately began reaching out to people like Dawn Wilson and Christine Warren who had witnessed the interaction. Sharon Chavez, who ran a local shelter, reported an unprecedented increase in both donations and volunteers. Michelle Connor, her assistant director, had to create a new system just to manage the influx of support. Chad Johnson and Noah Gibson, regular volunteers, found themselves training dozens of new helpers. Christopher Parsons, a business consultant, observed how the story was affecting corporate culture. Melissa Strong, who managed a large retail chain, implemented a new hiring initiative specifically targeting individuals working to rebuild their lives. Aaron Rodriguez took charge of developing training programs to support these new employees. Mr. Brian Hinton, who owned several local businesses, was inspired to create a mentorship program. Dustin Ramirez and Catherine Coleman, his HR managers, began developing protocols for working with local shelters to identify potential candidates. The media coverage, led by John Yates and Catherine Jones, focused on the broader implications of the interaction. Darren Medina, a social media analyst, noted how the story had sparked a wider conversation about meaningful ways to address homelessness. Bryce Wilson, who ran a think tank focused on urban issues, began researching how to scale up this kind of personal intervention. Mark Hudson and James Lara, both city council members, started working on policies to support similar initiatives. Robert Lopez proposed a program to connect homeless individuals with job opportunities in their former professional fields. Justin Boyle, a workforce development specialist, offered to help implement the program. Angela Brown witnessed how the story was changing perspectives among her students. Stacy Berry, another teacher, used the incident as a starting point for discussions about social responsibility and human dignity. John Jordan and Teresa Romero developed a curriculum unit about homelessness and community response. John Montgomery, who managed a large office building, implemented a program to hire qualified homeless individuals for various positions. Michelle Schmidt and Ivan Donaldson from HR worked to create supportive onboarding processes. Dawn Coleman coordinated with local shelters to identify potential candidates. Adam McCormick, a former Wall Street executive who had experienced homelessness himself, came forward to share his story. Lee Sanchez, a journalist, helped him craft a powerful piece about the importance of seeing beyond current circumstances to recognize human potential. Jonathan Brady and Keith Morris, both business owners, collaborated to create a network of companies willing to give second chances. Kayla McCormick developed a training program to help these companies successfully integrate new employees from challenging backgrounds. The impact reached beyond employment initiatives. Michelle Fox and Jessica Brown worked together to create a housing assistance program. Dr. Sarah Martinez offered pro bono medical services to support individuals working to rebuild their lives. Catherine Brooks coordinated dental care services, recognizing how important this was for job seekers. Jamie Trevino, who owned several apartment buildings, developed a program to provide transitional housing. Jacob Joyce and Adam Santiago worked with local organizations to identify candidates and provide necessary support services. Norma Arnold helped coordinate furniture donations for these housing units. Megan Turner noticed how the conversation in her office had changed. Melissa Mercado and Megan Hall found themselves discussing homelessness not as an abstract problem, but as an issue affecting real people with real potential. Christine Thomas organized a committee to explore how their company could help. Robert Schmidt and Melinda Wolf developed a financial literacy program specifically designed for individuals rebuilding their lives. Philip Chen and Joseph Edwards offered their expertise as financial advisors. Christine Glenn coordinated with local shelters to implement the program. Benjamin Murray, who ran a clothing store, started a professional wardrobe program for job seekers. Cody Coleman and Natasha Jordan managed the logistics of collecting and distributing appropriate interview attire. Robert Steele offered his tailoring services to ensure recipients felt confident in their appearance. Chase Chen and Jacob Wilson created a mentorship network connecting former professionals experiencing homelessness with people working in their field. Carla DeLeon and Austin Walker helped coordinate meetings and track progress. Amanda Kelly developed support materials for both mentors and ments. Jeffrey Coleman, inspired by Barron's example, established a fund to support education and training programs. Daniel Howell and Jeffrey Jordan worked to ensure the funds were distributed effectively. Michael Wilcox helped create accountability measures to track the program's success. Elizabeth Martinez saw an opportunity to expand her company's internship program. John Rivas and Carla Flores helped develop guidelines for including candidates working to rebuild their lives. Bradley Roth coordinated with local organizations to identify potential participants. The story's impact continued to grow as James Francis and Linda Williams organized a citywide conference on innovative approaches to homelessness. Jenny Santiago and Daniel Robinson brought together business leaders, social workers, and former homeless individuals to share insights and develop new initiatives. Lisa Salas and Marissa Chandler created a documentary series highlighting success stories. Mark Barnes and Kenneth Powers worked to ensure these stories reached decision-makers in both business and government. Christy Sullivan helped coordinate interviews and gather data on program effectiveness. Matthew Wright and Joshua Salinas developed a mobile app connecting homeless individuals with relevant services and opportunities. David Glass and Richard Freeman provided technical support, while Robert Thomas and Keith Hutchinson helped gather and verify resource information. Diana Garcia and Kenneth Stone worked on creating a database of companies willing to hire individuals rebuilding their lives. Joseph Dean and David Parker helped establish criteria and verification processes. Lisa Bolton coordinated with human resource departments to ensure successful placements. The impact reached government levels as Richard Johnson and Glenn Woodward proposed new policies to support these initiatives. Alexander Davis and Kim Jackson worked on implementation strategies, while Alexander Kane and Daniel Cowan developed metrics to track success rates. The story's influence continued to expand through social media as Dwayne Walters and Amy Hunt shared their own experiences with homelessness and recovery. Joseph Brown and Stephen Vega used their platforms to promote successful programs, while Lisa Martin and James Cox highlighted ongoing needs and opportunities. This cascade of positive change demonstrated how one genuine interaction could inspire widespread action. Cheyenne Harrington and Joshua Taylor observed how the focus had shifted from temporary assistance to sustainable solutions. Eric Rocha and Pamela Moore helped document these changes for future reference. The morning's events had triggered a transformation in how people viewed and responded to homelessness. Robin Lewis and Brian Jackson noted how the conversation had evolved from sympathy to active engagement. Amy Brown and Elizabeth Duncan worked to ensure this momentum continued building. As Tony Walters and Jennifer Kim developed new outreach programs, Cody Peterson and Crystal Lynn helped create training materials for volunteers. Mrs. Stephanie Villarreal coordinated with existing organizations to maximize impact and avoid duplication of efforts. The ripple effects of that morning's interaction continued to spread, demonstrating how one moment of genuine human connection could inspire lasting change. Kathy Foley and Matthew Mercado worked to document these developments, while Sandra Torres and Tanya Colon helped implement new programs. 6 months after that memorable morning on Fifth Avenue, the impact of Barron Trump's interaction with Thomas Mitchell had evolved from a viral moment into a lasting movement. Virginia Curtis, a sociology professor studying the phenomenon, documented how this single act of kindness had sparked sustainable change throughout the city. Thomas Mitchell's own story had become an inspiration. Leah Terry, who now worked alongside him at the financial firm where he had been hired, observed how his presence changed perspectives about homelessness. Valerie Shea, the HR director who had processed his hiring, noted that his success had opened doors for others in similar situations. Andrea Allen witnessed the transformation firsthand as Thomas became a mentor to others. Charles Santana, one of the people he guided, successfully transitioned from homelessness to a stable position in accounting. Jennifer Gentry, who coordinated the mentorship program, reported dozens of similar success stories. Elizabeth Armstrong, tracking the wider impact, documented how the initial ripple had become a wave. Amy Reyes noted that corporate involvement in homeless initiatives had tripled since that morning. Thomas Williams and Stephen Wilson watched their employee assistance programs grow beyond expectations. Rhonda Avila, who managed a chain of shelters, reported a sustained increase in both donations and volunteer engagement. Benjamin Morton and Taylor Cook developed new programs based on the personalized approach they had witnessed that morning. Stephanie McDowell coordinated these efforts across multiple locations. Olivia Hahn observed how the conversation about homelessness had permanently shifted. Peter McKinney and David Diaz noted that media coverage now focused more on solutions and human potential rather than problems and statistics. Angel Arroyo helped guide this narrative change through his documentary work. David Silva saw how the business community had embraced the concept of second chances. Jessica Jones and Lori Williams worked together to create a network of companies committed to inclusive hiring practices. Benjamin Fraser developed training programs to support these initiatives. Rebecca Shannon and Sherry Shaw tracked the policy changes that followed. Scott Patterson's research showed a significant increase in successful transitions from homelessness to stable employment. Melanie Webster documented how these changes affected families and communities. Tony Riley and Jeremy Cooper found that the impact extended beyond employment. Timothy Grant witnessed how housing programs had evolved to better support people during their transition. Thomas Gutierrez helped coordinate these improved support services. Jeremy Chambers noticed how public perception had shifted. Patrick Vargas studied how the viral video had sparked a lasting change in attitudes toward homelessness. Julia Koch developed educational programs to maintain this momentum. Linda Tyler saw the long-term effects in her volunteer work. Charles Scott and Rachel Brown coordinated expanded outreach programs. Daniel Pierce and Justin Gallagher helped secure ongoing funding for these initiatives. Luke Johnson observed how the story continued to inspire action. Lisa Young and Michael Gordon developed new approaches to community support. Kelly Gonzalez helped implement these programs across multiple neighborhoods. Dr. Mary James studied the health impacts of the improved support systems. William Elliott and Jennifer Parrish coordinated medical services for people in transition. Amber Clark helped ensure these services remained accessible and effective. William Hickman noticed how the business community had maintained its commitment. Laura Hines and Rebecca Perry developed sustainable funding models for support programs. Evan Hart helped coordinate corporate partnerships. Craig Williams saw the impact in education. Christy Green and Dr. Kurt Montgomery developed programs to prevent homelessness among students. Sean Larson helped implement early intervention strategies. William Mooney tracked the program's success rates. Rebecca Edwards and Jennifer Torres documented the growing number of success stories. Adam Miller helped analyze the data to improve program effectiveness. Mr. Cameron Salazar studied the psychological impact of the new approach. Joy Nicholson and Frank Blackwell developed support systems for people in transition. Mason Diaz helped coordinate mental health services. Brandy Coleman saw how the movement had spread beyond New York. Patricia Ruiz and Stephen McDonald helped establish similar programs in other cities. Jeremy Fisher coordinated these expansion efforts. Michael Castaneda observed the long-term sustainability of the changes. Megan Ritter and Mike Giles developed metrics to track ongoing success. Wayne Salas helped ensure programs remained effective and responsive. Sherry Cruz witnessed how the initial moment had inspired lasting change. Michael Craig and Alicia Townsend developed new approaches to community support. Michael Phillips helped coordinate these efforts. Michelle Baker saw the impact in her work with families. Christopher Hernandez and Noah Brennan developed programs to support children affected by homelessness. Miss Gina Hart helped implement these initiatives. Shelby Perry tracked the ongoing media coverage. Brittany Holt and Julie Wells documented how the story continued to inspire action. Richard Johnson helped maintain public awareness and engagement. Matthew Garcia noticed how corporate culture had changed. Jessica Brown and John Soto developed new approaches to corporate social responsibility. Mr. Justin Aguirre helped implement these changes. Patrick Gardner saw the impact in government policy. Candace Griffin and David Carpenter developed improved support systems. Adam O'Brien helped coordinate between public and private sectors. Brian Valdez witnessed the transformation in public housing. Vicki Atkins and Jeremy Wells developed new approaches to transitional housing. Deborah Jefferson helped implement these programs. Frederick Wilson observed how the movement had maintained momentum. Brianna Hansen and Maureen Becker developed sustainable support systems. Michelle Fox helped ensure long-term program viability. Rebecca Norris tracked the ongoing success stories. Allison Lopez and Nathan Russell documented the lasting impact on individuals and families. Stuart Smith helped coordinate follow-up support. Ashley Ramirez saw how the approach to homelessness had fundamentally changed. Catherine Choi and Alex Martin developed new outreach strategies. Julia Sosa helped implement these methods. Teresa Cannon witnessed the sustained community engagement. Matthew Lyons and Harold Bradley developed programs to maintain public involvement. Mary McCoy helped coordinate volunteer efforts. Renee Rice observed how the business community's commitment had endured. Andrew Mullen and Rodney Gates developed new approaches to corporate involvement. Casey Powell helped sustain these initiatives. Daniel Gray saw the impact in education. James Gallagher and Paula Garza developed programs to support students at risk of homelessness. Richard Young helped implement these preventive measures. Jessica Andrade tracked the ongoing policy changes. Angela Lopez and Victor Rodriguez developed improved support systems. Christina Thomas helped coordinate these efforts. Aaron Koch witnessed how the initial moment had inspired lasting change. Melissa Robinson and Holly Gallagher developed new approaches to community support. Karen Howard helped maintain program effectiveness. Kimberly Roberson saw the impact in healthcare. Mary Burton and Carolyn Lopez developed improved medical support systems. Reuben Anderson helped coordinate these services. Ashley Stanley observed how the movement had spread nationally. Louise Wilson and William Nielsen developed programs for other cities to adopt. Christopher Cooper helped coordinate these expansion efforts. Let us know in the comments if you've ever witnessed a moment of kindness that created lasting change. Share your stories about times when a single act of compassion sparked a broader movement for good. Because sometimes the most powerful changes begin with one person choosing to see another's humanity and responding with genuine kindness.